This session is really focused on ways that land trusts and public PACE programs can be thinking about working with landowners and operators and helping to support and help to find financing for conservation practice adoption on protected land. And Tyler, I mentioned way back at the beginning when we started this, and I was walking through the agenda, that you coined the term untethered, and that sometimes it's easier for a land trust, in fact, to be doing this kind of work and helping to identify opportunities for cost share assistance on protected land if it's sort of not actually combined with the land protection work of the land trust. So this is sort of what gave impetus to this conversation. And we are really lucky to be joined by Tyler Miller, who is the Vice President for Land Activation at Vermont Land Trust, has done a lot of work. He's going to talk about many different things they're doing, one of which is through a conservation innovation grant that is a NRCS grant. And then we have Stephanie Zimmerman, who is the Assistant Director of the Bureau of Farmland Preservation for the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. And the Pennsylvania Department, and particularly with Stephanie's leadership, has done several projects through the NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP. Show of hands, how many people know about the Regional Conservation Partnership Program? Okay, some, but not all. So Stephanie, when you talk about it, you might want to do a little bit of an explanation of what it does. We don't need to have detailed, but it seems like most people have at least a bit of an understanding. So I think with that, I will be quiet and turn it over to, I'm not sure. I think, Tyler, are you going to go first? Sure. Okay, Tyler's saying yes. So Tyler, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Hey everyone, great to be here with you all. Yeah, so I'm Tyler from Vermont Land Trust, and I think I'm going to primarily share this particular project that we're working on. But to get there, I'll give it a little bit of background on what my organization is and kind of the history and how we found our way to this idea of untethering, and just really a focus on soil health and some things around soil health. So I think I'll share my screen at this point. I think, yeah, to start out, so Vermont Land Trust, we've been around for 45 years. Vermont's a great place to do conservation work. Farmland protection work has been a great public and private partnership for a lot of years. Really great public support for it. So we've been really successful. Primarily, like a lot of land trusts, our focus over time has been principally on easement acquisition and stewardship. We actually just last month closed our 1000th farm conservation easement, which was a cool milestone. So kind of high volume and lots of easements and lots of stewardship of those easements over the years. And so, you know, like I think a lot of folks, you know, thinking about how do you show up as an organization that's doing everything you can to like meet the moment and meet the needs of the day and sort of be in relationships across a whole suite of agriculture and environmental issues and topics. You know, we've really been thinking hard about that for a long time, and you know, particularly thinking about the climate crisis, farm viability, affordability, sort of the in Vermont, you know, water quality and soil health are deeply interconnected, like I suspect they are in a lot of parts of the country. And so really, we sort of came to soil health as like this natural expansion, evolution, growth of our conservation easement stewardship programming. You know, as we did more and more things that felt like landowner assistance, technical service, policy development, started to see more and more opportunities for us to really grow partnerships that we hadn't had before or had but could grow further. Excuse me, and really think about, trying to ask this question, like what's the unique value add we could bring as a statewide organization, a land trust that's good at a suite of activities, and how could we apply that here? So that really got us into this like ever growing network of partnership, to just think about this idea of wraparound services for farms. That includes financial, sort of business planning and farmland access kind of concepts, transfers and transaction concepts, but also water quality and soil health, support, technical service provision. And so being part of that network has been really powerful and has helped us to see, just to see where we can plug in and add value. And one sort of real suite of places we found was just this idea of on-farm restoration opportunities. And there's a lot of work in that like large category, but there's a lot of gaps. And so we've been focused on thinking about where we can fit into those gaps. And I'm going to focus mostly on this one project, but just in general, we've really identified a couple of things that we can do pretty well. We can bring people together in a way that has proven to be somewhat unique. We can do sort of large scale project management pretty well from our conservation and stewardship work. And we can think ever increasingly and creatively about how to both deploy the capital that we have and how to expand what conservation capital can be used for. And so the way that's manifested here is for us to develop a couple of pieces of programming. One is around trying to provide that, like we sometimes call it, last mile of financial support to farms to take advantage of the really great programs that already exist. So really, like, what are the barriers there? Often a lot of public funded processes or programs are based on a cost share that have a gap at the end, and for some farms that gap is prohibitive. So we've had a fund for a while that we've been trying to grow and think creatively about how to sustain, that just meets farmers at their, sort of where they are on the farm to make those last investments in soil health and restoration, often through cost sharing on EQIP or other familiar programs, some of our state-based programs. That's been really successful and sort of opened us up to the possibility that we could play a role, sort of outside of traditional easement work, which has been powerful. Most recently, and the project I'll get into now, is just this idea of, I think like a lot of parts of the country, this idea of payment for practices and ecosystem services it's really nascent here in Vermont. And it's probably a long ways from being, an overarching program that addresses the needs of hundreds or thousands of farms. But as we've been involved in some of those conversations with partners, it became clear that the scale and scope of it is sort of overwhelming for everyone. There's not enough money to sort of do something at scale here. But what we really identified needing is some pilots, some examples, some places where folks could see a project through its life cycle and see the potential for that type of project to scale. So that's really where we went, and we found an opportunity in the in the Conservation Innovation Grant program at NRCS. This was new to us a few years ago. I think it's a program that's been around, but I don't think has been that well known in the land trust world, and sort of, I think, maybe been perceived as more of a research focus and maybe outside of our wheelhouse. But as we got more curious and started to explore, we identified a set of partnerships in a way for us to conceive of a project that we thought could be competitive for this program. And so we partnered with our University of Vermont, both the research side and the extension side, and with a private agricultural consultant group called Biological Capital, that put together a proposal to try to model out and actually implement a very small scale sort of pilot of what an ecosystem service payment regime could be, based on a narrow set of practices that would be sort of tailored to Vermont and would allow for both a trial of an incentive package to farmers, and then a research component that really addressed and refined like what exactly was being accomplished through these practices. And so that got us to this particular project. So we ultimately decided on a grazing-based project. Vermont's a great place to grow grass and to graze ruminants and other animals. And so our project is called Managing Pasture for Healthy Farms and Soils across Vermont. And so the idea is to develop this cohort of farmers who are transitioning land into this suite of practices around rotational grazing, to develop a payment structure that isn't a cost share, but is actually a more comprehensive payment that looks at both what are the true and total costs to implement these pieces, but also like starts to point us in a direction of like what are the sort of environmental social benefits of these practices, and how might those be valued. And then the second piece of that is to sort of come behind that cohort as they're implementing those practices, and to collect data and do research to really measure like very specifically, well, how much phosphorus is retained, how much is the soil retention increased through these practices. I think we found through our partnership with the university, like kind of a surprising lack of data for how that manifests in Vermont in these particular soil types. So these sort of two pieces together, and really we could never do this without these partners. Particularly research is really out of our depths. But what we do have is really like some expertise around being able to do this first purpose of really creating the systems and structures to recruit this cohort of farmers, sort of using our long relationships and trust building that we've done with farmers through the conservation work over the decades, really leveraging our ability to do great project management, to do good financial management, and to really develop contracts and sort of manage subcontractors, and sort of put all those pieces together around a complex project like this. That's the role we're playing in this project. And then our partners are playing the role of like the specific technical assistance of provision around these practices to farmers, the research, both around the soil health research and the sort of parallel economic and social data that's being collected. So we have 20 farms in the program across Vermont, really trying to focus on a couple of other prominent soil types to get a sense for what changes can you see over what is a five-year period. And this last slide, just to take it a little closer, it's 4 practices in some combination that's a right fit for the property, for each of these properties. So no-till seeding, cover cropping, tailored nutrient management for these pastures and transitions, limited mechanical improvement is generally subsoiling in compacted soil conditions, and then the management intensive rotational grazing. So in most cases, 3 or more of these are happening in unison, the rotational grazing every time, and then some combination of the rest. And this is all sort of structured around a 4-year comprehensive farm plan, grazing plan for the property. And that's the basis for the payments and the basis for our annual verification that triggers the ability to make the payments. And what we're looking for here and trying to learn, like I said a bit, but just to get a little bit deeper, right? So measuring the impacts of these practices on soil health and ecosystem health. We're also trying to really calculate that cost and benefit and use that as a set of data which we can then reflect on the payments that we made. So the payments are based on some models and some like cost of production data. We think, in the end, we're probably not quite there yet to really have like a fully incentivizing payment, but we're probably closer than we've ever been. And then some limited social outcomes is particularly around just trying to, I think one of the things that's maybe underappreciated around this particular practice is like it's increased labor, it's increased time, it's sort of a change of lifestyle to transition from continuous grazing or no grazing into management intensive rotation grazing. So trying to really sort of think about both what that costs and like what it means for like the lifestyle. And then finally, we're in year 1 of this project. So we just finished our first year of data collection. We're about to do verification and first year of payments for practices. But in the end, you know, you're using this data to start to get a sense for like, what does it really take to do this transition? How do we help shift this really idealized set of practices in our geography and in our environment, and start to be able to help people see what it will really take, and simultaneously to help policymakers and organizations to really think about what would it take from the public and philanthropic sectors to really help incentivize this and really help sustain it over time. So I think I will stop there and yeah, pass to Stephanie.
Well, let me do this before you pass it off. Let me see whether there are particular questions for you while it's fresh in people's minds. Anyone questions for Tyler? Well, people are thinking, I do have one, Tyler, just wanted to ask while I was thinking of it, is the assumption that these incentive payments would need to continue after the end of the period, or is there an assumption that with the sort of adjustment, accounting for labor, accounting for improved pastures, what that might do to livestock weight, et cetera, that you wouldn't need to do the same level of incentive payments after this trial period is over? I'm just sort of talk to us about how you're thinking about it long term after this trial period.
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris. Thanks. There's probably like a practical and philosophical answer to that. So I think from a practical matter, like the funding will end and there won't be something that replaces it in all likelihood. So the design was this would be a 5 years of payments, and hopefully that gets you through that transition period, and you really start to build increased productivity on these soils, and you're starting to, I mean, one of the real barriers is especially coming onto sort of like depleted land and just not getting that much forage off of it in the early years. So at a minimum, we're building some kind of like on-ramp for that, which feels good. The more philosophical perspective, I think there's, you know, growing sense that, you know, like nutrient and water retention ought to be something we should be paying farmers for. And so I think, you know, we would probably use this data to suggest like what an ongoing payment might be able to look like in this context. You know, there's a lot of just like market dynamics that are outside of any of our control or depth around when you do these practices. It doesn't mean you automatically get 30 or 40% more for your products. So there's sort of access to markets and the sort of like somewhat tenuous nature of that really factors into like what might be needed for some of these farms to be sustained over time. They're factoring those into their business planning to the greatest extent they can, but yeah, this particular project is very much proof of concept pilot, and we hope it leads to more. But we're not sure yet if it will.
Right. Great, thank you. Any questions? Okay, well, not seeing any, we'll have a second chance after Stephanie, but Stephanie, let's turn it to you and talk about RCPP and the great work that the department has done and is doing through that program.
Sure. Good morning. As I already mentioned, my name is Stephanie Zimmerman. I'm out of the Bureau of Farmland Preservation in Pennsylvania. I'm the assistant director for the program, and I've been working here for a little over 15 years. And in that time period, I've focused very heavily on administering the federal programs. So just a little background, I know we're going to focus today on the RCPP, the Regional Conservationship Program, but I also wanted to just real briefly mention, we've been participating in the ASEP, the Ag Conservation Program, used to be known as FRPP, Farm and Ranch Land Protection Program, since 1996. And we've been very successful with this program. We're working on our, I believe we're up to our 15th cooperative agreement. We're using program agreements now. But we have been able to preserve over 41,000 acres, and we've received over 36 million in additional funding for our easement purchase program through the regular ASIP program. And then in 2018, we started participating in the RCPP programs. And currently we have 3 active RCPP projects. Our first project we submitted for was a proposal back in 2018. And this project is the implementation of conservation practices and nutrient management planning. And for this one, we were awarded $6.3 million. It was a combination of, the majority of it was installation of best management practices, working through the EQIP program. I believe we had $5.3 million for that, but then we had $1 million of ASAP money that was used for easement purchases. So that was one thing that was nice with this project, is that we were both installing easements and we were installing best management practices. Now for this project, we had a 6-county area of Pennsylvania in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So our funding came through the CCA, the critical conservation money, versus the pot of money they have that is designated as state money for state projects. This was our first project. It was under the 2014 Farm Bill. So there were some changes when we moved into the newer Farm Bill. But this project is getting ready to wrap up. We have 5 years to complete it. We're on our getting ready. Our last year will be 2023, and we already have all our funding obligated. It's just a matter of the best management practices being completed on the project. So we are looking for that one to be wrapping up in 2023. Our second project, which was by far our largest project so far, was the 19 RCPP, which is, we took a section of what's known as the Kinnantiny Ridge in Pennsylvania. It's a 22-county area project. It's a total of 9 partners for this RCPP. And I just want to mention to everybody, it's great to have partners, and it's a requirement for RCPP to have partners. Having 9 partners is a lot. So just keep that in mind as you're working with the different partners. This is our, I guess, our second year that we're actually submitting applications in on that, meaning landowners that are participating, but it's a lot to keep 9 different partners together and on the same page. We do regular meetings. We are doing both agricultural easements and we're doing forest easements. So it was 4 state agencies and 5 land trusts that made up this project. We were awarded $10 million for it. Again, this was in the critical conservation area of the Chesapeake Bay for Pennsylvania. So the reason why I mention that is that brings us to our third project, which is the one we were just awarded. This is Farmland Preservation and Climate Change Mitigation Project. We were awarded $7.85 million for this project. We have 5 different partners. It's the Bureau of Farmland Preservation and the Bureau of Markets. And then we have Rodale Institute, the Western PA Conservancy, and Clearwater Conservancy. They're the 5 different, and it works out very well with like the 4 to 5 partners, keeping everybody on the same page. So this one, we're just getting started in it, but what's exciting about this one, this is our first statewide project, meaning we were able to get out of that area of just being in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So that was exciting. This is going to focus heavily on installing climate smart practices on preserved farms. Currently in Pennsylvania, we have over 6,000 farms and a little over 600 600,000 acres that are preserved through the Farmland Preservation Program. So our thought process is these are farms that we've invested in that are going to be preserved in perpetuity. So let's focus on those as getting the installation of the climate smart practices. Plus, these landowners have already made that investment to preserve their farms. So these are landowners that are going to be willing to take those extra steps to install those practices on their farms. Plus, as a requirement for our state easement program, they're required to maintain a conservation plan on all the acres that are preserved. So another component to this project is, and this is where our Bureau of Markets comes into play, is they have a program where we're transitioning farms that traditional farming practices that are transitioning into organic farms and getting certified as certified organic. So that's a component of this project. We also still will maintain having the forest easement component to it. So we'll still be putting on some, preserving some forest lands. And then the other new part to it is we're using Rodale Institute, who's going to be monitoring the carbon capturing abilities of these newly installed climate smart practices, and they're going to be tracking them. Now, like I said, we were just awarded this. We have our first meeting with NRCS, I believe is next week, to start working on the programmatic agreement. That's the first step in these projects. So as part of that, we are going to be, NRCS already has an existing climate smart practice list for the entire United States. But one of our first steps is taking that list and narrowing it down to those practices that will be earmarked for Pennsylvania. So those practices that would work on Pennsylvania farms. So that's one of our first steps. It'll be part of the programmatic agreement as we get started into this project. I also wanted to mention, just for those people out there that may have never worked with the RCPP projects before, the proposals are the biggest step, as far as you got to have the idea, you've got to submit your proposal, and you got to get NRCS's approval on it, and they'll tell you the funding that's available to you for that project. So just a little background on it. So first, NRCS will come out and announce, hey, we're accepting applications. The first thing we do in Pennsylvania is we hold a meeting with NRCS, find out who our state representative is. We sit down with them, we give them our ideas, and they're going to give us feedback right away. You know, yes, this is a great idea, or no, you want to be looking at something else. So before we get too far into the project, we know we have a project that is going to be interesting to NRCS. The second thing we do is determine our partners. So as I mentioned before, 9 partners is a lot. For us, we found, 4 or 5 partners to be a good number at the most. You want everybody bringing different components to the table. It's a requirement that you have multiple partners. And also, in order to be classified as a partner, they have to be bringing funds to the table. It doesn't have to be a lot of funds. We've partnered with some of the smaller land trusts that, aren't bringing a lot of dollars to the table, but you have to be bringing something to the table to be counted. NRCS will not count you as a partner unless you're actually bringing dollars to the table. For Pennsylvania, we're fortunate that the majority of the funding that we use for these projects comes from our state easement purchase fund. That's what we use as leverage for these projects. We have a guaranteed funding source for that. So to calculate or determine the amount of money coming from PDA for these projects, we look at, well, how much funding are each of those counties within Pennsylvania that the project is earmarked for, using for that project. So that's how we're able to leverage our state easement funds to show that we're bringing our contribution to the table. So if we're requesting a $10 million project, we have to show that we have at least $10 million. NRCS is looking for a 1-to-1 match on these projects. The other thing I wanted to mention on these projects is writing up your proposal would be your next step. Don't be scared or nervous about writing the proposal, because you'll go right into NRCS portal. They already have the questions there for you, and you're able to answer them. They go right down a list. You have to stay within the parameters of those questions. You know, like they make it very simple for you. It is even down to the size area you have to, like, number of words or number of letters. I forget how it is for each one of the questions. So I've ran into problems where I've had too much to say, and then I've had to shorten it up for the answer to fit in the blocks. So writing the proposal isn't bad. The funding isn't bad. You're required to have it's called FA, which is the financial assistance, and the TA, the technical assistance. It's a 70-30 split. You cannot have more than 70% of financial assistance and no more than 30% in technical assistance. This is something, the reason why I mentioned this is one of the areas that's new to us for this project. As I mentioned before, our 2 previous projects were very heavily in easement purchases, whereas this project is going to be very heavily on installing the climate smart practices. So we're just starting into this one, but what I'm being told by NRCS is that this point, when we're doing the program agreement, I'm going to have the opportunity to negotiate with them on adjusting that 70-30 split, meaning we're going to need more technical assistance for this project than financial assistance. So I'll find out on that over the next several weeks here. We're being told that by March of 2023, all of the programmatic agreements for the 2022 RCPPs are supposed to be completed. Stay tuned on that. That would be great, because that's a pretty short timeline to do these. I think it took over a year to do the programmatic agreement on the first one, or the second proposal that we did. So it'd be great if we can get that wrapped up in that short of a window. What else I wanted to mention to you is, as being a partner, I wanted to mention one more thing. So the partners each have to be bringing funds to the table. They also are required to submit a letter. From each partner has to submit a letter which gets loaded into the portal. It is a letter from each partner stating how much they're bringing to the table or what contribution they're giving, that breaks it out into a chart over the 5-year period. You know, are they bringing all their funds first year? Are they going to divide a little bit out over each of the 5 years? That has to be in there. It's just verification of what their contribution to the project is. A map is required of your project area. As I mentioned before, this is our first project where we're actually got approved for a statewide project. So what we did for our map for this one is we actually worked with NRCS on it, in the sense they gave us a map showing the areas of the state that needed a lot of conservation work done. So what they refer to it is a high amount of work is needed to be done, but a low amount has been completed at this point. So we have some counties, for example, you know, like a Lancaster County, where there's a lot of ag work that needed to be done, but there's a lot of focus on Lancaster. So they have a lot of need, but they're also receiving a lot of funds already. Where we're looking to hopefully work with preserved loaners that are in maybe more outlying areas that need a lot of work, but aren't getting the funds to get that work completed. So landowners in those counties would be a little bit higher priority for us. So that's the map that we provided. I would say the other thing I'd want to mention on these projects is you want to keep it fairly straightforward. I'm not necessarily saying simple projects, but you don't want to get bogged down in too much details and too many ideas. Like we had, I think there were 5 main project areas or areas that for this project we were focusing on. The climate smart practicing, the monitoring of those practices, agricultural easements, forest easements, and the transitioning to organic. That's the focus area. So keeping it straightforward, the map. For us, now that we know that it's been approved, our next step is negotiation of that programmatic agreement. That first step is done between the lead partner of your project and NRCS. So in this case, it would be the Bureau of Farmland Preservation and NRCS. I make it a point to make sure to keep everybody in the project up to speed, keep everybody in the loop. We hold regular meetings. And I would suggest that that would probably be one of the things I just wanted to mention as being just really good working relationship with your state NRCS office, keeping the partners in the loop and updated on what's going on. As I mentioned, I have a meeting coming up with NRCS to start that first process. And then the next day I have a meeting with the new partners, getting them together. So it's real important to keep everybody together. So with that, that just kind of gives you a background of our projects, our success with the federal program. I gladly answer any questions anybody might have at this point. I'll open it up to discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Are there questions for Stephanie? And if I'm not seeing anyone, I'm gonna kick one off while you all think about it. And I think, Tyler, this is knowing that VLT has looked at this program as well. I think this question is directed at both of you. So the reason why we wanted to talk about both of these programs, both the Conservation Innovation Grants, which is the sort of opportunity that VLT used, and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, is in part because because of the Inflation Reduction Act that I mentioned yesterday, there is significantly more money going into these programs. Some additional resources for FY23, the current fiscal year, but many more resources presumably going in FY54 and beyond, with the focus on climate smart agriculture practices. So in theory, this represents an opportunity for folks who are working both in land protection and in trying to help farmers and landowners in implementing conservation practices. There is additional money available. And I think the question is how do we in this community of agricultural land protection practitioners tap into some of these? And so my question for both of you is that we have a number of folks on this call who represent fairly small land trusts or county programs, not large state departments of agriculture. And what, from either or both of your perspectives, how would one go about sort of thinking about using either of these programs? Are partnerships the key? Because they're complicated programs, you have to have a match for some of them. Sort of what's the strategy that you guys might suggest for smaller land trusts, smaller agencies who might be interested, but it's a big lift for them?
Yeah, so I can answer a little bit of that. So the way the Pennsylvania program is set up is we're the State Department of Agriculture, but we're like the umbrella for 58 county programs that work under us. So for these federal programs, our strategy is, like I had said, we come up with our idea, but then I hold meetings with each of the counties. So we'll hold county meetings, because the way our program works is we have the state agency, we have the 58 county programs, but it's those county programs that actually make the connection with the landowners. So I don't go out and find the landowners willing to participate. We work through our county programs for that. And the way our county programs are, we have county programs that are run out of the conservation district office. We have programs that are out of county planning offices, and we have some small county programs that they run it out of their kitchen, you know, so we have a whole gamut of different ways our county programs work. But it works well in the sense that those county administrators, they have that connection with our landowners. So making those personal connections. So when they hold their meetings with landowners that are interested in the federal programs, you know, they're sitting across from the table with them. They're making the direct connection. The farmer's going to tell them, you know, right up front, yes, I'm interested in these certain projects or these practices I want to install on my farm. And hopefully when they have that conversation, I'm going to have provided to the counties that list. Here's the climate smart practices we're looking to install, you know, so it's using those counties. It's the best way we have found to make this program work, is having the direct connection between the counties and the landowners.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler, your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think for the CIG Conservation Innovation Grant, I mean, one really helpful thing is just the match is only 20%. So like that actually makes a big difference for us, and I think maybe for all the nonprofits. So a lot easier to wrap our head around that than the typical 50% match. So that I think is great. I mean, I think partnerships are the key. It certainly was for us. You know, I'm certainly no expert on the ins and outs of it, but like you can scale a project to your capacity, I think, pretty effectively. That there is space for significantly smaller or larger projects than the one we're doing. But you know, like kind of like the main thing that comes to mind is like just thinking about your unique value add, like where you want to go and what like piece of it you might hold. And like we're working with a couple of really small organizations on this project who just have like a handful of staff. But like they have this like key piece of synergy in the work. So I think that's possible. I mean, and I also kind of think to the greatest extent to have it be work that you're already heading toward anyway. So that it's not like this whole giant new lift. Has always felt good to me. And because, you know, like every new thing, it'll take more capacity than you thought at the beginning. It's just kind of inevitable. So the closer you are to your core work and like the direction, I think the better.
Great, that is helpful. Other questions, thoughts?
The one thing, I've done a few RCPPs in my day, and the one thing, just a unsolicited advice would be, as you choose those priorities and as you choose your screening, all these things, talk to your local NRCF, like talk to the soil cons who are going to be the ones that have to do all this work for you. Because even though it seems like it's a partnership and that like the partners are going to do the work, at the end of the day, everything goes through NRCS and it goes through those soil cons, and it has to make sense to them too. And so just keeping, because sometimes the local offices, and I've done this twice now, we get almost pushed off to the side and no one talks to us as these RCPPs get developed. But then at the end of the day, like that's who everything goes through. So just keeping the local staff, talking to them and talking to them about resource concerns and screening tools is going to be really, really important, because otherwise you're going to, a partner of ours ended up in a situation where he's like, oh, I see, or I want these priority areas. And he really limited where he could fund. And then he didn't get any applications from those areas because they're hard to reach areas, because that's historically they've been hard to reach. It's like this problem. And then he couldn't spend his money because he didn't get any applications. And so I'd say keep things open, open, open. Do not restrict yourself with your screening tool, and do not restrict yourself on resource concerns, because you're gonna be bummed at the end of the day when you can't spend the money.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. I totally agree with you on that. Our first RCPP, like I had mentioned, was a 6-county area. And it was, the reason for that was we worked with NRCS and found out where that target area was. They made sure that they had people and staff to complete those projects in that those couple counties. So yeah, that is really key. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you. So part of this discussion is intended to get people to be sort of thinking about what are the ways that outside of the land protection work or in conjunction with it, can we really be helping to provide or direct financial assistance to protected farms. And I'm just curious whether of those of you all, whether there are folks who are already doing some kind of work of providing any kind of financial assistance, or who are really aspiring to do that. And if you're aspiring, what are the challenges that you are seeing in sort of trying to get into doing this type of work?
Yeah, this is Charlie. I'll just chime in. Being a small land trust, I will say we are so underfunded for almost anything like this that until we have money to bring to the table, we're out of almost all of this stuff. I mean, 20% doesn't seem like a big lift, but for us, we're trying to come up with money to help people with doing a conservation easement. We're, under $10,000 is pushing us.
Right.
And I'll be really honest about it. If you're a small land trust, a lot of this stuff it's really neat stuff. I like it. I'm just trying to think, how can we implement it in our current situation? And I'm sitting here going, it's going to be a challenge. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, no, I hear that. Are there others who feel in that same boat? Show of hands, who feels like it's just too big a lift because you don't have the capacity? Nobody's.
And I'll add in, we are a watershed-based system. We deal with 174 square miles. So we are tiny compared to a lot of other people out there. We are really tiny.
Yeah.
This is Janice. Our challenge, we're participating in both ALE and RCPP that has some funding for practices. And I also have a grant for 2 years to support climate smart practices. So this is a great launch for us. One of the challenges with our philanthropic funding is that the timing is short, it's 2 years. So how we get money out the door, other than for technical service providers and a lot of the support, the work that we're going to do from this soil health project, which the timing's perfect there, but how we're going to get it out for practices within the philanthropic, deadline is going to be a big challenge for us. So lining all that up. And I feel like in general, funding, outside funders outside of the ag world that do want to support this don't often understand the cycle, the farming cycle.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point on the if you're trying to match with particularly other funding sources that have a very finite, a shorter time horizon. that seems to be a challenge. Tyler, just on the conservation innovation grants, are those 5-year grants?
Yeah.
They are.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, that's helpful. That's a little bit. Other thoughts? Other constraints? Challenges?
So I just wanted to chime in. I put something to that effect in the chat. I feel like AFT can offer to provide some of that cohesion building and capacity because we put in big proposals all the time. I feel like we've gotten pretty good at that at this point. We manage large projects like this one fairly regularly. And so one opportunity that I think across this group, I'd love to put out there as well, you know, if we all join forces, if we see an opportunity, we can jump on something together and each land trust or other entity can take on the piece that they have capacity for. AFT can lead a larger project between our various national programs. We can do that, and we could probably accomplish a lot that way.
Right, that's a good point, Bianca, and I would be remiss in not mentioning 2 things about RCPP, and I see that we're close on time. First, we are just starting a Wisconsin RCPP, and Angie, I'm looking at Angie, because she is the one managing that project that is focused largely on farmland protection, but has a little components of soil health and a little bit about land access. But for those of you in Wisconsin, you may already be partners, but Angie is certainly one to talk about that there. And that is an example, Bianca, of where we did sort of bring together partners statewide. I will say from the National Agricultural Land Network, this is something that we are interested in trying to help, where we can help collaborate or bring people together. I want to mention that for those who are interested, those who either have current RCPP projects or are very interested in pursuing it, we have a virtual workshop planned, and this is simply an open discussion to talk about what are the opportunities and challenges around RCPP, particularly focusing on the land protection, but incorporating other conservation practices with that land protection. And Beth, remind me, I want to say, or maybe we can just put that registration link in the chat because it is on November 10th, I believe, from time of that.
I think it's 2 to 4, but it might be 1 to 3.
It's 1 to 2:30 Eastern time.
So that is Eastern time, but Jamie is putting a link in the chat. So if those of you who are interested in talking more about the opportunities and challenges about RCPP, please feel free to join us for that conversation, because we would welcome all input and we hope that it will be helpful to sort of get people thinking. But thanks, Bianca. That's a good point on how we think that AFT can play a role in helping to bring people together and think about collaborative projects. So I see what time it is. I think unless there are any other questions for Tyler or Stephanie, that we should move on to our last session. So any last questions for Stephanie or Tyler or thoughts? Tyler, Stephanie, thank you ever so much to you both for joining us. You guys are doing great work. We are always impressed by what you all are able to do. You're a great inspiration for all the rest of us. So thank you so much.